Do you know what $300 feels like when you're 67 years old and your right eye is still swollen shut from surgery? It feels like a test, not a financial test, a character test. The kind that tells you plain and clear exactly who the people around you are and exactly where you rank in their lives. I'd been failing that test for years, nodding and saying, sure, that's fine when it wasn't fine, not even close. But that changed in October, and the man who came out of that month is not the man who walked into it. My name's Virgil Tanner. I'm 67 years old, spent 31 years as a shop teacher at Harrison High School in Terre Haute, Indiana, taught teenagers how to read a blueprint, cut a straight line, and measure twice before they ever picked up a saw. I retired in 2019 with a decent pension and a house on Chestnut Street that my wife Dorothy and I have lived in since 1991. She was an administrative assistant at the school district for 28 years. We're not rich people, but we are not desperate people either. We have what we need and most of what we want, and we have always known the difference between those two things. In late September, I had cataract surgery on my right eye. Both eyes were going, the kind of going where you're reading menus by guessing at words you know ought to be there, but we started with the right. Outpatient procedure at Regional Hospital, in and out the same day. Recovery was going fine. A little scratchy, a little light sensitive, nothing I wasn't warned about. What I wasn't expecting was the insurance gap. My prescription plan had a processing delay on 2 of my post-op eye drops, the anti-inflammatory and the antibiotic. The pharmacist at Walgreens on Wabash Avenue laid it out for me simply, $285 cash or come back when the insurance sorts itself out in about a week. That was a Tuesday morning. My eye was patched. I couldn't drive. Dorothy had a dentist appointment she'd been waiting 3 months for. So I did what you do when you've got a son who lives 12 minutes away. I called him. He picked up on the second ring, which should have felt like a good sign. Would have, if I hadn't been paying attention to the quality of his voice when he answered. There's a difference between a man who's glad you called and a man who picks up, because he didn't check the caller ID fast enough. 31 years of teaching teenagers left me fluent in that distinction. I kept it simple. The pharmacy on Wabash, the 2 eye drops, $285. Told him I'd have it back to him Friday when my pension hit. No question. He knew about the surgery. He'd been in the waiting room the morning of. Yeah, Dad, absolutely, he said. Right away, like the answer was already prepared. But then, and this is the part I should have caught, he kept going. Listed off 3 things that were tight for him financially right now. The mortgage refinance, the kids' fall activity fees, the new HVAC unit my daughter-in-law had been pushing for since July. I sat there in my kitchen with the patch over my right eye listening to that list, and something in the back of my brain tried to flag it. A man who's going to do something for you doesn't usually need to tell you 3 times over why it's hard for him to do it. I didn't listen to that part of my brain. I said thanks, told him the pharmacy closed at 9, and hung up. He never showed. Not that afternoon, not that evening. I called back once around 6, went to voicemail. I left a message that was more cheerful than I felt. Something about it being fine, we'd figure it out. Dorothy called it stoic. I'd call it something else entirely. That night I took my last remaining drops from the small sample bottle the surgeon had sent me home with. 4 drops left, not enough to get me through Friday. Welcome to Dad's harsh revenge. Get comfortable, hit that like button, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I promise you this story goes somewhere. The next morning I drove Dorothy over to her sister Pauline's place 2 streets over. Dorothy doesn't drive much anymore since her knee started giving her trouble, and on the way back I stopped at the CVS on 3rd Street and paid the $285 myself. Cash from the emergency envelope we keep in the kitchen drawer behind the phone chargers. The same envelope Dorothy and I have been refilling since 1998 for situations exactly like this one. The prescription was ready in 20 minutes. I paid it, picked it up, drove home, and put in the first real dose. My eye felt better within an hour, the way it should have felt since Monday. I don't want to tell you I sat there brooding. I wasn't brooding. I was watching the morning news and running through my grocery list and thinking about what needed to get done before my follow-up appointment Thursday. Normal day. That's what I was running in my head when Dorothy came in from checking the mail and said, "Oh, Daniel's car was over at Angela's parents' place this morning." Pauline saw it when she brought me home. Said there was a big box on the front porch. I filed that away. Didn't say anything about the $285, didn't say a word. Here's what I found out 3 days later, from a neighbor who'd seen the whole thing clearly from across the street. My son had gone to my daughter-in-law's parents' house that same Wednesday. The same Wednesday I'd been standing at a CVS counter, paying cash for my own prescription, and delivered a gift. A framed cruise package. One of those Mississippi River sailings out of New Orleans. 7 nights, 2 passengers, all inclusive, the kind of trip that runs about $11,500 for a decent cabin. My daughter-in-law's parents had their 35th wedding anniversary coming in December, and my son, who couldn't locate $285 on a Tuesday evening, had booked it sometime in the past month and hand-delivered it like he was bringing them a Christmas ham. $11,500. I want you to sit with those two numbers side by side for just a moment. $285 denied Tuesday night, $11,500 delivered Wednesday morning. Same son, same wallet, same week. I didn't throw anything when I found out. I don't throw things. I walked into my study, the small room off the hallway where I keep my woodworking books and my old lesson plans from Harrison High, and I sat down at my desk. I pulled out a yellow legal pad, the kind I used to use for writing up shop projects, and I wrote the date at the top. October 9th. Then I wrote one sentence underneath it. Son declined $285 for post-op eye drops. Same day, $11,500 cruise for in-laws. I clicked the pen shut, set it on the pad, and looked at what I'd written for a long time. 31 years of teaching, I told students the same thing at the start of every project. Describe the problem accurately before you try to solve it. I wasn't ready to solve anything yet, but I was going to be very, very accurate about what I was looking at. Dorothy noticed something had shifted. She knows the difference between my tired quiet and my thinking quiet, and she knew that what I was sitting in for the next several days wasn't tired. Thursday night, I told her. Not everything, just the numbers. The $285, the $11,500, the fact that my son had been at her parents' place the morning after he never showed up with my prescription. She set down her tea and looked at me. Are you sure about the cruise? I told her what the neighbor had seen. I told her what I'd put together. She was quiet a long moment. Then she said what I knew she was going to say, because Dorothy is nothing if not consistent in the things she fears. Virgil, please don't let this turn into something that damages us with the kids. I cannot go another round with Angela deciding we don't get to see our grandchildren. There it was, the thing underneath everything. My daughter-in-law had done it once, about 2 years back. Some disagreement over Christmas plans, something small and forgettable, and she'd told my son in what she thought was a private call that maybe they needed some distance from his parents for a while. Dorothy had overheard it on speakerphone. She hadn't forgotten a syllable of it since. It had sat in her like a splinter, working its way deeper every time there was any friction with that side of the family. I hear you, I told Dorothy. And I did hear her. I just wasn't agreeing. The difference between those two things took me another week to act on. My son called the following Sunday. Easy tone, relaxed. The way you sound when you're pretty sure the other person isn't going to push back on anything. He asked how the eye was healing. He never mentioned the pharmacy. He never mentioned that he'd never shown up. He talked about the grandkids' soccer schedules and some home renovation he and my daughter-in-law were planning, and toward the end of the call he dropped in, offhand, like an afterthought, that now that I was dealing with some health things, it might be smart for him to have access to my financial accounts. Not control, he said, just access. In case something came up and I couldn't handle things on my own. In case. I told him that sounded reasonable, and we'd talk about it. He heard agreement. I have learned, late in life, that there is real value in letting people hear exactly what they want to hear. The call that changed everything came 11 days later on a Monday afternoon, from Martin, my daughter-in-law's father, the man whose 35th anniversary cruise my son had just purchased. I want to be honest about Martin because it would be easy to make him the hero of this story and stop there. He deserves more than that. He ran a small engine repair shop in Sullivan, Indiana for 30 years before he retired. He is not a man given to sentimentality or drama. When he called, he didn't apologize for calling. He didn't soften what he was about to say. Virgil, he said, I've got something that belongs to you, or at least something you need to see. Are you home? He was on my front porch 20 minutes later. He didn't come inside. He stood at the door. It was a gray October afternoon, the kind that smells like wood smoke and wet leaves, and he held out a manila envelope with a metal clasp. My daughter sent this to me by mistake, he said. She meant to forward it to her mother. She sent me the whole chain. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I didn't read it. He held the envelope out toward me. Your son thinks I'm on his side because of the cruise, Martin said quietly. He's wrong. He turned around, walked back to his truck, the old one I noticed, not any new truck, and drove off without another word. I stood on my porch in the October cold, holding an envelope I didn't understand yet. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table. Dorothy was at her book club. I had the house to myself, and I was grateful for it. I opened the envelope. The first item was an email thread. My daughter-in-law had forwarded it to her mother under the subject line Virgil situation. The original email was from my son, sent to my daughter-in-law 3 weeks earlier. I read it twice before the full weight of it settled. He had been consulting with a financial advisor, not mine, his own, about a power of attorney arrangement. The advisor had outlined what that would require: a physician's statement of cognitive or physical impairment, a legal filing, a co-signatory. My son had written to my daughter-in-law that given my recent eye surgery and what he called my general situation, this might be the right time to get ahead of it. Get ahead of it. There was a second line I read probably 5 times. If we're going to protect his assets, and ours down the road, we need to move before he does something with the Chestnut House on his own. The Chestnut House. The house Dorothy and I have lived in since 1991. The house I've been paying the property taxes on with my own pension check for 34 years. My son was worried I might do something with it on my own. I set the email on the table and looked at my hands. My right eye was still a little tender at the corner. The drops were working fine. I was healing exactly the way I was supposed to be healing. There was a second page, clipped behind the email, Martin's handwriting on a sheet of lined notebook paper, 4 sentences, plain and direct. I did not ask for this gift, and I did not know what was behind it. I am returning the cruise package to your son directly, and I've already called the travel agency. I thought you should know what's been happening. You deserve better from your son than what you've been getting. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. The furnace kicked on, the refrigerator hummed. I thought about 31 years of telling teenagers the most important part of any job is being honest about what you're working with before you start. I'd been working with bad material for years. I just hadn't wanted to look at it clearly. Dorothy came home around 9. I was still at the table. The envelope was closed, sitting flat, squared up with the edge of the table the way I always squared up a stack of receipts before filing. She looked at me and knew. I handed her the email without saying anything. She read it once, then again. When she looked up, her hand was pressed flat over her mouth. Virgil, she couldn't finish it. I know, I said. I didn't know it had gone this far. Her voice was very small. The prescription I could almost make myself believe was just poor judgment. But the house, he's been planning this. He's probably half convinced himself it's protection, I said. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. She moved around the table and sat across from me. What are you going to do? What I should have started the night he left me to buy my own eye drops. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. The next 2 weeks I said nothing to my son about any of it. He called 3 times, same easy tone. I answered normally, asked about the grandkids, listened to him talk about the spring renovation. All the while I was meeting with an estate attorney in downtown Terre Haute, a plain-spoken man who'd been practicing for over 20 years and who didn't need things explained to him twice. In 2 meetings, we set up an irrevocable living trust. The Chestnut House went into it. My pension distributions went into it. My son was not named anywhere in the document, not as executor, not as beneficiary, not in any capacity. The trust designated that the house, after Dorothy and I no longer needed it, would fund a vocational scholarship at Harrison High School for students in the shop and trades programs. Kids who wanted to learn a skill, but couldn't cover the cost of the tools to start. I thought about that for a long time before I settled on it. Then I stopped thinking about it because it felt exactly right. The attorney asked if I understood what irrevocable meant. I told him I'd been measuring twice before I cut for 31 years. I understood. I scheduled a family dinner for the first Sunday in November. Dorothy made pot roast. The grandkids ran in the backyard for the first hour, and I watched them through the kitchen window and let myself be glad for that. However this night ended, those kids were still my grandchildren, and I intended to make sure they stayed in my life. That part I'd already settled. My son came through the front door already talking, a promotion at work, some new account he'd landed, something about a trip he and my daughter-in-law were planning. He had the energy of a man who's very comfortable about where he stands. He had no idea Martin had picked up the phone. We ate. Good meal, easy conversation. The grandkids, Dorothy's book club, the Colts' season. I let my son finish his plate and pour himself a second glass of wine and settle into the comfortable feeling you get when you think everything is fine. Then I asked Dorothy to leave the dishes where they were and sit back down. The room noticed the change. You can't stop that from happening. It's physical. I reached under my chair and set a folder on the table. You mentioned wanting to help manage things, I said. The accounts, the house, getting ahead of it for me. Let me tell you exactly how things are being managed. I opened the folder. 3 weeks ago, I set up an irrevocable trust. It's fully executed. The Chestnut House is in it. My pension distributions are in it. I slid a single page across to him. You are not the executor. You are not a beneficiary. That's not going to change. He actually laughed. A short sound, disbelieving. The laugh you produce when you're certain someone is joking and you're waiting to be let in on it. Dad, come on, you can't just... I did, I said, and I can. This is about the prescription. Flat, not even a question. You're doing this over $285. I want to be precise about what I said next, because I've thought about it many times since, and I don't think I'd change it. The $285 is where I started paying attention, I said. This is about what I found when I did. I slid the email across the table. He didn't touch it immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something you recognize from a distance, and you're still hoping you're wrong about what it is. My daughter-in-law went still when she saw the page. She knew exactly what it was. Martin sent me this, I said, along with a note telling me he'd returned the cruise to you directly. The silence after that was unlike anything I'd heard in that house in 34 years. My daughter-in-law looked at my son, really looked at him. The kind of look a woman gives a man when she's recalculating something fundamental. You told me that cruise was money you'd been setting aside, she said. Very quiet. He didn't answer. He took out a short-term personal loan to cover it, I said. I verified that with the bank. He had nothing to say. He sat in the dining room of the house where he'd grown up, with the email in front of him and the trust document across the table, and he had nothing. Dorothy spoke then. I wasn't entirely certain she would. She'd been so carefully quiet all through dinner. But she stood up and she looked at our son and she said, I knew about the prescription. I knew you didn't go to that pharmacy, and I said nothing for 3 weeks because I was scared of losing the grandchildren. I let your father buy his own medicine and I sat on it. That was cowardly of me, and I am done being cowardly for your benefit. She sat back down. She took my hand across the table. That was the whole speech. It was enough. My son left before the coffee was ready. He didn't have the energy left for a scene. He picked up his jacket and walked through the kitchen, and the screen door closed behind him, soft and final, the way things close when a person has nothing left to prove. The rest of it unfolded the way these things do when the foundation finally gives. The personal loan he'd taken for the cruise came under review, once Martin formally declined it in writing and the travel agency processed the cancellation. The interest rate he'd signed wasn't forgiving. He was left holding the debt for a trip that no longer existed, and my daughter-in-law's parents knew exactly what it had been bought to accomplish. They separated in December. I don't know all the details of what happened between them after that Sunday. That's their marriage, and it belongs to them. What I know is that my daughter-in-law called me herself in late November. She was clear-eyed and direct, which I've always respected about her, even when things between our families weren't easy. She asked if Dorothy and I still wanted to be part of the grandchildren's lives. I told her there was nothing on this earth I wanted more, and that my answer to that question had nothing to do with what her husband had done. She said she understood. I believe she meant it. My son came to the Chestnut House in January. Cold morning, the sky the flat gray Indiana gets when winter has stopped trying to be dramatic and just settles in. He stood on the front porch and he said the thing I think he'd been rehearsing for weeks. You took everything from me. Over $285. I looked at him. The lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. The tiredness in him that I recognized because I'd carried something like it myself for a long time before October. I didn't take anything from you, I said. I stopped pretending you hadn't already taken something from me. That's a different thing. He stood there a moment longer, the cold moved through the porch. When you're ready to have an honest conversation, I said, you know where I am. My door is open, but you walk through it as my son, not as a man with a plan, and that's going to take real time, not the kind you can shortcut. I went back inside. I didn't watch him leave. These days, I spend most mornings in the workshop out back. Both eyes are clear now. The left surgery went fine in March, and I can read a measuring tape again, without squinting. I've been building a blanket chest from some white oak I had drying since before all of this started, and I'm in no hurry with it. Good wood deserves patience. Dorothy brings coffee out around 9 and sits on the old stool by the window, and we talk about whatever's on her mind. Most mornings what's on her mind is small and warm and has nothing to do with any of this, and I am grateful for that more than I know how to say. My son and I have not spoken since January. Maybe that changes. Maybe he needs more time than I budgeted for him, or maybe the distance does something a conversation couldn't. I can't know that from here. What I know is that I am done building on his behalf while he figures it out. I spent 31 years teaching young people that you cannot put a true structure on a crooked foundation. You have to pull it up. Start over. It costs time and pride and more than you think it's going to. Every single time, without exception. I hope my son is learning that. I genuinely do. The chestnut house will outlast both of us. And when it does, some kid in Terre Haute who wants to learn a trade and can't afford the tools to start will get a little help getting there. That kid doesn't know my name. They don't need to. I built this life with these two hands, and a piece of it is going somewhere it was always meant to go. That's not nothing, not even close.